All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. Today, we're looking at some of the most incredibly defended creatures on planet Earth. We're talking about poison frogs. These are animals that pack literally millions of years of evolutionary chemical engineering into these incredibly small, vibrant packages. As we go through these slides today, we're going to unpack exactly where they get their dangerous defenses, how they use their shocking appearances to survive, and why these seemingly invincible amphibians are suddenly in desperate need of our help. So, right off the bat, we have to ask, how do these tropical frogs get their stunning colors? It's kind of this fantastic biological paradox, right? Think about the rainforest for a second. It's a highly competitive, dangerous environment packed full of hungry predators. Normally, if you're a tiny one-inch animal, the absolute last thing you want to do is stand out. You want to blend in, be invisible. But these frogs, they're practically glowing in neon shades of red, blue, and yellow. How on earth does an animal that looks like a walking piece of candy survive in the jungle? Well, the answer to that mystery is summed up perfectly by this quote right here. If you eat me, it could be the last thing you ever do. And honestly, they're not bluffing. Take the strawberry poison dart frog, for example. It's barely an inch long, yet it secretes a substance so toxic that a single drop can easily kill a bird or a snake. Their brilliant colors aren't a fashion statement. They're a literal death threat. But what's truly mind-blowing is how they actually become so deadly in the first place. Which brings us to Section 1, a highly toxic diet, or you are what you eat. You see, the common assumption is that these frogs produce their own venom, kind of like a snake or a spider might. But the reality is actually far stranger. They don't generate their deadly poison naturally. They literally have to steal it. Scientists discovered something called the dietary hypothesis. Basically, while non-toxic frogs just eat a standard, broad diet of whatever bugs wander by, highly toxic dart frogs are absolute specialists. They actively seek out and consume highly toxic arthropods. They're essentially acting like chemical sponges. Their bodies are specially adapted to safely absorb these hazardous chemicals from their prey, move them to the granular glands in their skin, and then basically store them up to use as their own personal weapon system. Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is exactly where that chemical supply chain comes from. The frogs are harvesting these compounds, called alkaloids. When the frogs eat certain ants, they absorb unbranched alkaloids. And when they eat these tiny soil-dwelling oribatid mites, they absorb branched alkaloids. Over 800 different alkaloids have been found in frog skin extracts so far. So these tiny, unsuspecting bugs on the forest floor are unknowingly fueling an amphibian arms race. All right, moving on to Section 2, Aposematism and Predator Warning, the ultimate warning label. Because think about it, having all this stolen toxicity is totally useless if your predators don't actually know you have it. You need a way to broadcast your chemical weapons to the rest of the rainforest, loud and clear. So that brings us to a really crucial concept, aposematism. This is simply the use of bright coloration by an organism to advertise its unpalatability or toxicity to potential predators. Think of it exactly like those bright red and yellow hazard signs we use for dangerous chemicals or high voltage. The frogs are doing the exact same thing. Instead of camouflage, they use these highly conspicuous colors to train predators that eating them is a terrible and often fatal mistake. But how did they get so wildly colorful in the first place? Well, let's trace this evolutionary timeline from modern-day Panama. About 10,000 years ago, populations of the strawberry poison dart frog in the Bocas del Toro region were uniform in color. Then sea levels rose. This flooded the habitats and trapped different populations on these isolated islands. Fast forward to the present day, and these isolated frogs have evolved an insane variety of colors. We're talking neon yellow with spots, brilliant orange red, deep ocean blue. They literally rival a bag of Jolly Rancher candies. 40 times. That's a staggering number. Researcher Molly Cummings at the University of Texas at Austin was studying these islands and discovered this stat. She found that the brilliant orange-red frog from Salade Island is literally 40 times as toxic as a matte green frog from neighboring Colon Island. When they tested the toxins, the poison from the brightest frogs caused extreme reactions, while the blander frogs caused a much, much milder response. Basically, the more toxic the frog evolved to be, the louder and brighter its warning colors became. But there's actually two distinct evolutionary forces at play here. It's not just about predators. Yes, visual predators, especially birds who have excellent color vision, shape the signal by picking off any flashy frog that isn't toxic enough to back up its warning. But there's another pressure entirely. Female frogs actively prefer to mate with the brightest, shiniest males. Usually in nature, flashy colors attract predators and get you killed. Just picture a peacock dragging that massive tail around. But dart frogs, they totally lucked out evolutionarily. Their flashy colors simultaneously warn off the birds and attract the females. They get to survive and get the girl. Let's move on to Section 3, strange breeding and parenting, or going to extremes for the next generation. Because attracting a mate is just step one. Ensuring your offspring survive in the ruthless jungle requires some of the most bizarre and extreme parental dedication in the entire animal kingdom. The level of care here is just incredible. First off, parents lay their eggs safely hidden away in the moist leaf litter on the forest floor. Once those eggs hatch, the magic happens. The adult frogs actually allow the newly hatched tadpoles to stick to the mucus on their backs, and they piggyback them, one by one, high up into the rainforest canopy. They drop the tadpoles off in tiny individual pools of water that collect in bromeliad plants. And it doesn't stop there. Because these little canopy pools have zero food in them, the mother has to return regularly to feed her tadpoles her own unfertilized eggs until they grow up and metamorphose. It's an absolutely wild amount of work. And just as a quick side note to show you how wild amphibian reproduction gets globally, meanwhile over in Taiwan, researchers found this jewel-eyed tree frog where the embryos actually feed on their mother's unfertilized eggs while they're still developing inside her womb. It just goes to show how amphibians are constantly pushing the boundaries of biological possibility just to ensure their next generation survives. Which brings us to Section 4, conservation and existential threats, invincible in nature, vulnerable to us. Because despite millions of years of brilliant adaptation, we hit a pretty sobering reality here. The profound irony is that these frogs are virtually untouchable in nature. Nothing can eat them, but their brilliant chemical defenses are completely useless against humanity. They're facing these really severe overlapping threats. First is massive habitat loss due to expanding agriculture, slash-and-burn farming, and mining. Then there's the deadly bead fungus. This causes a disease called tridiomycosis, which is literally wiping out amphibian populations on a global scale. It's so bad that zoos are actually resorting to treating captive frogs with human athlete's foot medicine just to fight off the fungus. And finally, simply because they're so beautiful, they suffer heavily from overharvesting for the international exotic pet trade. To put into perspective just how fragile their existence has become, let's look at the breeding ponds of the critically endangered golden mantella frog in Madagascar. Their entire potential breeding area is severely fragmented into just 3 isolated zones. You've got 59% of their ponds in Mongabele, 32% in Ambatovi, and a mere 9% in Torodorfatsi. If a mining operation or a farming fire sweeps through just one of those tiny zones, a massive chunk of the entire species' future is wiped out in a single afternoon. It's not an entirely hopeless story, though. If we compare survival strategies, while the golden mantella is struggling with that isolation and habitat loss, look over at the yellow-banded poison dart frog. It's currently listed as least concern. Why? Because it actually breeds really easily in captivity. Responsible herpetoculture has flooded the market with captive-bred frogs, and that drastically lowers the prices and effectively removes the financial incentive for poachers to illegally harvest them from the wild. Sometimes captive breeding can actually be a vital shield for wild populations. So the crucial takeaway here is that protecting these ecosystems isn't just about saving a pretty animal. We are talking about preserving millions of years of irreplaceable chemistry. For instance, the phantasmal poison frog secretes a chemical called epibatin. Scientists discovered that this compound interacts with our nervous system and has the potential to be a phenomenally powerful painkiller, fundamentally different from opioids. If we let these forests burn, we aren't just losing frogs. We're burning down a biological library filled with medical marvels that could literally save human lives. So I want to leave you with this final provocative question. Can animals that evolved to be perfectly defended against nature survive humanity? These frogs mastered the art of chemical warfare, predator psychology, and extreme parenting over thousands of millennia. They totally conquered the rainforest. But their survival now depends entirely on whether we can learn to value and protect the incredibly delicate ecosystems they call home. It's a massive challenge and one that's entirely in our hands. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I hope it sparked your curiosity, and I'll catch you on the next one.